So hey guys, this video is going to be on Liber Librae and I'll give the introduction in a second. I just want to say, as always, take everything I say with a grain of salt. This is by no means a video saying this is how you should interpret this text. That goes for all my videos, but I just want to say it first and foremost. Do your own research, read these texts yourself, do your practices yourself, interpret them as you will. Based on your own experience and insights. So yeah, just don't want anybody to say I'm ever saying this is how you should interpret anything. So with that, let's get to the video. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. So I'm at Liberty State Park, just enjoying the weather, and I want to do a little breakdown or analysis on Liber Librae. So again, these are just my musings. Take everything with a grain of salt. Do your own research. With that, let me jump into this. So this is a text from the Golden Dawn, and it was revised by Crowley. Mathers put it out, and in the Golden Dawn, they had a very Christianized version of it. There was portions of the text, one verse in particular, that talked about not judging a woman based on her impurity. And I think it had to do with like Mary of Magdalene, but Crowley scrapped that and he made his changes, and in 1909 he published it in Equinox Volume 1, Number 1, under Liber Librae subfigure 30. So quick note on the subfigure, 30 is the value of the letter Lamed, the Hebrew letter Lamed, and in Kabbalah that corresponds with Libra. So Liber Librae, the book of Libra, the book of balances, or the book of the scales. The number 30 is interesting. By Gematria, there are two things. One is to strike or to smite, and the other word that I find that balances that from strike and smite is to be weary. So you have these two opposing words that are very interesting, and later on in the text it gives a verse that kind of mentions the pillar of severity and the pillar of mercy, and I'll talk about that when I get to it. Also, there's 0 through 21 verses, giving a total of 22. Under the number 22, you have the 22 paths of the Tree of Life, which connect the Pillar of Severity and the Pillar of Mercy with the middle pillar. So there's a balance there. Also, the number 22 is the letter Vav spelled in full. And the letter Vav symbolizes a sword. So if you look at the Thoth Tarot deck for the letter Lamed, we get adjustment. And in that card you see Mot holding her scales and the sword of judgment. And the sword has two sides, right? And you can read about the symbolism in the book of Thoth. Basically, there is a side to pass judgment, and then there is a side for somebody who strikes themselves by doing the wrong thing. But with that, I'm going to jump right in, and I'll go kind of line by line, and when stuff pops out to me, I'll talk about it. Verse 0. Learn first, O thou who aspirest unto our ancient order, that equilibrium is the basis of the work. If thou thyself hast not a sure foundation, whereon wilt thou stand to direct the forces of nature? So Crowley is writing this to be published in the Equinox, and his ideology is that people studying the Equinox are going to join the AA. But it's also the Equinox as a whole. I've heard him describe it as the Ark of the Covenant, to preserve the occult law of Thelema, that in case of calamity due to humanity's stupidness, for lack of a better way to say it, hopefully the Equinox will preserve the occult knowledge to be passed down to future generations and give a full way for people to initiate the great work. So that's the ancient order that one might aspire unto, according to Crowley writing this. Equilibrium is the basis of the work. Now, that's true in very many esoteric schools. In Hinduism or yoga, you have the Ida and Pingala, which are these two contending forces within the body that are balanced in the center, in the spinal column where the main 7 chakras reside. And the Ida and Pingala symbolize sort of the sun and moon, the interplay of push and pull, active and passive within each person. And they're balanced in the middle by the Sushumna. So that's one way to look at it. The other way is with the Tree of Life model, where you have the Pillar of Mercy, the Pillar of Severity. You have fire and you have water, and the balance of these in the middle pillar creates the Pillar of Air. So equilibrium is the basis of work. This also implies straightforwardly stability. A lot of times people get into spirituality to help them cope with life. And part of coping with life is dealing with mental health, mental illness. And I'm a big advocate for people getting the help they need. Yes, you could use the occult to stabilize yourself, but you really need to be stable before you do certain things, specifically higher grade work. Like you might be doing LBRPs and some asana work, and that's good, that's stability inducing. But if you're getting into stuff that's dealing with heavy energies, it's very easy to find yourself going a little cuckoo, especially if you have undiagnosed PTSD or bipolar or prone to depression. It's very easy for your stuff to get kicked up that you haven't worked on. So you need to be stable before you're really diving into certain work. If you kick up a Kundalini experience and you haven't addressed your PTSD, you're going to be stuck on an ordeal cycle where this stuff is getting kicked up, you're freaking out, you're destroying your, going through self-destructive tendencies. You need to be stable. So equilibrium is the basis of the work, but it's also part of the work itself. It's part of the great work, is achieving a union of opposites. If thou thyself hast not a sure foundation, whereon wilt thou stand to direct the forces of nature? Yes, you need that stability. A lot of people that tend to be unstable end up doing stuff like the Goetia, thinking that if I could control demons, I am going to be some all-powerful master magician. And one way of looking at the Goetia or lower spirit, clifothic, low vibrational entities is that these are attached to, or they kick up the lower parts of the individual, and you have to somehow appease these. You have to make sure that you are in control of them and you are responsible for them. You are giving them what they need, but not giving them what they want, because that will tend to be things that destroy you. I don't want to give any specific examples and start invoking names of entities or whatever, but let's just say certain entities with the 7 deadly sins, right? Let's say a person overeats a lot, and that's one of their really bad habits, and they have poor health as a result. If you start working with certain entities that correspond with that illness, they're going to start to take control of you. So you need to make sure you've already addressed your lower desires and have found some type of healthy living habit so that these entities don't start kicking that up and pushing you into it. Another common one is drug addiction or being prone to drug dependency. They will, working with certain forces, will drive you right back into that. It'll kick up stuff in your life, and if you're not ready to cope with those situations, you're going to be drawn right back to your vices and self-destructive tendencies. So you need to have that stability in order to direct the forces of nature. Certain energies, certain spirits, work with certain deities. If you look at mythology, some Greek gods could be very, very cruel. Gods don't have the same type of standards for interacting with people that you might have with somebody. Sometimes they don't have to be so concerned with us. They need you to be stable and go do what they need you to do, right? Same way, if you're working with a lower spirit, you need them to do what they need to do, and if they swerve from that, you need to be in control of them. Verse 1, know then that as man is born into this world amidst the darkness of matter and the strife of contending forces, so must his first endeavor to seek the light through their reconciliation. So I've quoted in a previous video, The Blue Equinox by Freda Rachad. There is a good essay on the solar current in the New Aeon line of thinking, that the sun doesn't die seasonally or daily. There's light permeating the entire universe, but we are in a body that creates shadow that blocks light, the same way the planet Earth blocks light as it turns. So one side of the planet's always dark and the other side is being lit up by the sun. That being said, the darkness of matter blocks the light. The light in our heart has to be able to come out of us. And there's a process to making that happen. right? So it's starting to insinuate some of those ideas. Also, the strife of contending forces comes back to sun and moon, or polarity of spirit and earth, divinity and low vibrational spirit, or God and demonic, or angelic and demonic, right? Trying to reconcile these forces. Also, there's a practice by Crowley where you balance every thought that comes into your mind with its opposite. Also, samadhi is union of opposites, or union with something specific. The job of the master of the temple is to create a perfect union in all things, to see duality and to be able to apply the exact opposite to create a third thing. That is a way of seeking the light. It allows you to ascend. Verse 2. Thou then who hast trials and troubles, rejoice because of them, for in them is strength, and by their means is a pathway opened unto that light. The ordeals I write not. Liber L. A lot of times people get bent out of shape when things don't go their way, and life could be very upsetting, and it's justifiably so. But when you're having a truly hard time with things, there's something that needs to be done. You either need to address something, you need to make changes, or you need to acknowledge something. When you're having these troubles, and especially when you're doing occult work and having these troubles, this is a great perspective to take right here. These problems are coming into your life because something is not right and needs to be changed. Something about you is going to be brought into light, and if you don't give up or fall privy to depression or whatever, you're going to grow because of this. And as a result of growing, you're more able to ascend, especially if you're doing great work of any occult order, right? So people get bent out of shape, and if you could take the perspective that, hey, this isn't happening to me, this is happening for me, that's something like really powerful. You take control of the situation. You're no longer just a leaf being blown by the wind, you know? You're taking control of what you're doing, what you choose to do. How then should it be otherwise, O man, whose life is but a day in eternity, a drop in the ocean of time? How were thy trials not many, couldst thou purge thy soul from the dross of earth? This is talking about the wheel of samsara. We're born, we live, whatever happens during our life, we get old, we die, rebirth. We're born, we live, rebirth. We're caught in a cycle of karma, birth, life, and death, and rebirth. Ultimately, it's until you get to a certain point and you start really taking some type of spiritual path seriously. And this is sort of somewhat of a Buddhist idea, or you're trying to break free from the bounds of reincarnation. And the way to do that is to achieve union with divinity. Not to just understand that I am God, you are God, everything is God, or part of this one organism. No, to actually experience that. Knowing is not enough, but experiencing it. I'll talk in a second about how small we are, and how short our lives are, just a drop in the ocean of eternity. There's a better verse that talks about that. But this comes back to the previous line. How were thy trials not many, couldst thou purge thy soul from the dross of earth? So this is a greater perspective on the previous verse, that things aren't happening to me, they're happening for me. And yes, we're born here to do our will and to have a life of joy and to experience the bliss, the ananda of existence. But that's a process to get there. And it's really like all of the ordeals that are happening are also showing you, hey, we've incarnated as a result of God reflecting upon itself, and suddenly that kicked in a chain reaction and things were no longer just in unity. They suddenly became cyclical. Now we finally evolved to a form of life where we're able to contemplate and realize we need to reach back up to divinity. We need to seek within ourselves that source of divinity, and all of the stuff that's, pops up in life, loss of love, loss of loved ones, right? Lost this job, didn't get that opportunity, this messed up, I made a mistake here, this person insulted me, whatever, right? Bad things happen. If you're taking it from an occult perspective and you're having ordeals, they're preparing you to not come back, to no longer reincarnate. So it's an interesting perspective, and I think it's a really healthy one if you apply it correctly. Continuing on, is it but now that the higher life is beset with dangers and difficulties? Hath it not ever been so with the sages and hierophants of the past? They have been persecuted and reviled, they have been tormented of men, yet through this also has their glory increased. So this is saying, for instance, look at the mythology of Christ or Osiris, right? There is like some brutal stuff that happened to this god man, and if you take that perspective as, yeah, initiation is going to kick up ordeals, things are going to happen that are hard to cope with. Life in general can be hard to cope with, let alone when you're doing serious occult work and you're dealing with very heavy forces, be they high vibrational, low vibrational. Stuff gets kicked up. When you're doing an occult path, it's again preparing you to start to break that wheel of samsara, but also be expected that, hey, 93% of the earth is not on a spiritual path that they're actively working on, right? Most people are caught up with, what's the newest thing that this celebrity said? What's the new thing that I could buy? When's the new phone coming out? This, whatever it is, right? Very petty, impermanent things that just benefit themselves at that moment and don't really lead to lasting happiness, right? And people tend to resent spiritual types. You know, it's a very common thing, you know. Somebody clearly achieves truth, union with Ananda, the highest, right? It's like people either don't want to hear that, or they get jealous, or they say, no, that's all BS, that's not true, that's not how life works, etc., etc. And so sages and hierophants tend to get the brunt of the stick from the multitudes. It's like, this, I've heard a funny saying, the truth will set you free, because the people that are running from the truth are going to do everything they can so that they don't have to see you, because seeing you is like looking in a mirror and irritates the hell out of them. That's why they killed Christ, you know? It's like, this man's claiming to be the Son of God, right? And it's like, well, we can't have that. You know, you're coming into the church, messing up our gambling and our selling and our profiting, and we can't have that. You're really working an occult path. That's, you know, when you tell somebody that you don't need a priest to help you reach God, you could do that yourself. There are methods that you could do that yourself, and you don't need a medium. You've just ruined somebody's career. They're going to resent the hell out of you. So sages and hierophants, yes, they do get prosecuted and reviled. And again, rejoice because of it if that happens to you. And it goes on to say, verse 4, rejoice therefore, O initiate, for the greater thy trials, the greater thy triumph. When men shall revile thee and speak against thee falsely, hath not the Master said, blessed art thou? I think that speaks in and of itself based on stuff I previously said. So moving on to verse 5. Yet, O aspirant, let thy victories bring thee not vanity, for with increase of knowledge should come increase of wisdom. He who knoweth little thinketh he knoweth much, but he who knoweth much hath learned his own ignorance. Seest thou a man wise in his own conceit? There is more hope of a fool than of him. So there's fools and fools. Fools could be like the tarot, the letter Aleph being attributed to the sphere of Bina, or the master of the temple being a fool with a capital F. And then there's foolish, right? Just plain out of control shenanigans. So this is referring to the latter, not bright, not wise, right? There's spiritual pride that comes on the path, and everybody has to kind of deal with that on their own, right? Sometimes people, like especially online, like they want to get involved in occult conversations because they learn something new, and they're trying to show like, hey, I really love this and I'm trying to connect with this group, and it comes off as vanity of look how much I know as opposed to look what I want to share, right? And it's very easy when you don't have body language or a person in front of you communicating with that you actually know, to know what a person's motives are, right? That being said, it's very easy to get to a certain point, to get a certain degree or a certain title or a certain position of power, let's say even not spiritually. It's very easy to find yourself born into nobility and think that you're better than other people because your family has always had a lot of money, you know, and you, depending on your religious perspective, a lot of people think, oh, I'm blessed by God that I was born into wealth, as opposed to it was chance or it was something karmically. So that being said, the spiritual vanity, or vanity in general, I think is very important. Vanity can be a very, very deep vice. Also, he who knoweth little thinketh he knoweth much, but he who knoweth much hath learned his own ignorance. I think it's Socrates, the only thing I know is that I know nothing, right? You can't know the ultimate truth. It's unknowable. That's the kicker of Taoism, that you are completely unable to know what that ultimate source is, right? So it's almost like the Divine Comedy in the Book of Lies. If you look at that chapter, the Comedy of Pan, and you take this into account, that you can't actually know the Ein Sof or Kether. Your mind is limited. It doesn't deal with anything supernal. It's strictly of the demiurgos, no higher. So nobody could really know anything past a certain point. And even quantum physics today is showing us how little our physics go. And there's like a threshold that we could hit with scientific research at this point. And then it's like, well, our devices for measuring things no longer work past here. And I look at that kind of as like the Kabbalistic abyss. Verse 6, be not hasty to condemn others. How knowest that thou in their place thou couldst have resisted the temptation? And even were it so, why should thou despise one who is weaker than thyself? That's like a great point for meditation. It's like, hey, there's no reason to hate anybody else. Yes, people step on our toes and it's fine to defend yourself. But to hate somebody because they're not doing what they need to do, especially if it doesn't affect you, right? Yeah, we're all going through stuff, and a little compassion goes a long way. And I think it's great. Why should you despise somebody who's weaker than yourself? Like, it just doesn't make sense. We're all prone to doing that, in school, kids pick on the weak kid, they bully him. And why would you do that to somebody unless you yourself are insecure about something? 7. Thou therefore who desirest magical gifts, be sure that thy soul is firm and steadfast. For it is by flattering thy weaknesses that the weak ones will gain power of thee. Humble thyself before thyself, yet fear neither man nor spirit. Fear is failure and the forerunner of failure, and courage is the beginning of virtue. So there's a certain point where if you're doing your will, your magic really should just go towards doing your will. Anything else is black magic and thelema. I'm not talking about other traditions, just thelema. So there's like a certain point, just because you can do something with magic doesn't mean you should. Unless you're 100% certain that this is in conformity with what you need to be doing, there's a karmic price that needs to be paid otherwise for putting your hand in the cookie jar where it didn't belong, When somebody does something messed up to other people, it's kind of like, I try to let it go, even when it's directed right at me, because karma is going to take care of it by itself. Whatever we do comes back, right? It sets in a chain reaction. So that being said, let's just come back to the main point. Magical gifts. Be sure that thy soul is firm and steadfast. Know what your will is. Just don't seek power for the sake of power. Seek power to do your will only. For it is by flattering thy weakness, the weak ones will gain power over thee. And that's again coming back to, like, especially if you're taking this in the context of occultism and low vibrational goetic or qliphothic entities, demonic forces. When you start using your vices thinking that you're using virtues, right? Or acting on vices thinking you're acting on virtues, powers around you and in you will suddenly start getting hungrier and hungrier and hungrier, and the more you feed them, the more they get hungry. And it's true, if you're not walking straight and narrow, in equilibrium, doing what you need to be doing, you're opening yourself up to a world of hurt. I love the statement, fear is failure and the forerunner of failure, and courage is the beginning of virtue. I don't look at courage as absence of fear. I look at courage as doing what I need to do regardless if I'm afraid, right? I see that as the ultimate form of courage. When you're afraid and you're not doing what you need to be doing, you are effectively prolonging your spiritual attainment. You're ultimately feeding into the wheel of samsara. You're running from Maya, and the Maya is the illusion cast by the Magus. And that's basically everything below the abyss, below the sphere of Chachma, below the divine light itself. So when you're not walking in line with that ultimate highest ideal, and see if there's something that you're afraid of doing or why you're acting on certain things. Are you afraid that you don't want more, that you're not going to get what you want, or are you craving something, and start to check what your motives are. Verse 8. Therefore, fear not the spirits, but be firm and courteous with them, for thou hast no right to despise or revile them. And this, too, may lead thee astray. Command and banish them, curse them by the great names if need be, but neither mock nor revile them, for so assuredly wilt thou be led into error. So yeah, all of our, if you look at Liber how Crowley says certain spirits of, especially the Goetia or Qliphothic, are attributed to certain parts of the psyche, you need to be in control of them. By giving them what they want, when they shouldn't be getting what they want, you're responsible for that, and you're unleashing them upon yourself and upon the world around you. Now, you need to be responsible for your demons. You need to keep them in check. You need to feed them what they need, not what they want all the time. One way to do that is to invoke the light, right? That's a very helpful tool. The divine names in 777 for each of the paths. So if you could identify a certain trait in yourself that's getting out of control, start working with that power. And if you're working with a specific spirit from a specific path on the tree of life, you could use the divine name to keep it in check, right? You don't need to banish it necessarily, you need to keep them in check. If you need to banish them, there are ways to do that as well. Simple banishing techniques. Otherwise, sometimes serious therapy or serious life changes are necessary. Neither mock nor revile them, for so assuredly wilt thou be led into error. So don't ever get cocky, It comes back to that previous statement. If somebody is weaker than you, why would you hate them for it, Don't make fun of anything that's beneath you and that you're responsible for. If you're greater than something, the greater you are, the more responsibility you have for everything that's beneath you. Keep that in mind. Verse 9. A man is what he maketh himself, within the fixed limits by his inherited destiny. So in my view, that's talking about our natal charts, our karma, our nature in general. So I don't necessarily believe that there is a 100% everything is predestined that's going to happen. I do believe that there is a free will, and I believe that there are certain things based on our karma that we need to do in this incarnation, but how they're going to come about could happen in several ways, depending on the actions or inactions that we don't take, right? If we're doing what we need to be doing and we're working through our baggage, we're starting to clean things up, it allows us to, if you have a pile of garbage and you're starting to take the garbage off the top and throw it out, then you could get to the deeper stuff. You can't start with the deeper stuff first without making a bigger mess, So that's the fixed destiny, and you are limited by certain capacities, being human, family, economic, socially, spiritually, karmically, etc. Right? So being a part of, he is a part of mankind. His actions affect not only what he calleth himself, but also the whole universe. So keep in mind, we're all spirit. We're all the divine light. We're all God, essentially. And I look at this line like everything around us on the planet Earth, there's air particles everywhere. And by moving, you're actually creating a chain reaction of particles that would have moved some other way, but because you're moving, you are creating this shift in particles that, it's a very minute change, but in the whole grand scheme of things, that little change, look, if you look at a trajectory, here that's a very tiny change, but as it goes up, suddenly it's created a very big change with a lot of time. The astrolight is another factor. because what's happening on the astral plane is essentially what's happening below is happening above. So we're affecting the highest by what we're doing on the lowest. And when you reach the highest planes of existence, you're still affecting the lower planes, everything all around you. So there's a lot of things to consider when you take an action. And if you're taking them out of more petty reasons, you know, it creates a lot of hurt in the long run. And we could create a lot of good, or we could create a lot of hurt. And we look at our societies today, some things are a lot better, some things are a lot worse. And it's a result of the Nephesh and the animal soul, right? And it's going to talk about right here. Verse 10, worship and neglect not the physical body, which is thy temporary connection with the outer and material world. Therefore, let thy mental equilibrium be above disturbance by material events. Strengthen and control the animal passions. Discipline the emotions and the reason, nourish the higher aspirations. So this is opposing the idea of Abrahamic religions that, or at least Christianity, that the body is impure because it's made of matter and it's not God, it's not angelic, it's not spirit. So therefore we have to revile it. No. That's completely opposite. We've been giving this body for our spirit to operate through and interact with other things. And in that, when we're doing it correctly, there's a joy and an ecstasy that comes with it. So that being said, we need our body in order to work spiritual goals. So don't neglect it, don't hurt it, keep it healthy. Find what you need to do for your specific body and give it the fullest attention until it becomes routine and you can focus on other higher aspirations. It's a connection with the outer material world. With mental equilibrium, I think it's really good to acknowledge everything going on around us, but if it's disturbing you, there's something that needs to be checked, right? There's a way, I suppose, or at least I hope that everybody could get to a point where regardless when things are unsettling around you, we could still look at things objectively as a scientist and say, hey, these things are happening, even if they're traumatizing and really bad things happening, they are not the ultimate form of life. My spirit can't be hampered by them, right? Just my body, and my body is temporary. But it's when we start to think that our minds and bodies are all that there is to existence, it's very easy to worry about, oh my God, if this is hurt, this is it. And when you get to a certain point in spiritual occultism, right, and you understand that, hey, there is a deeper life going on behind everything, that this body's gonna die, but there's still a spirit, and that cannot be hurt by anything, that I think it allows us to take a more objective look at what's going on around us and not be so distressed by them. Control the animal passions. That's the Nephesh in the Kabbalah. That's attributed to Malkuth. And that's, I've said it in the past, that's your wants, your basic needs and your wants, your desires, and sex, food, more, money, new clothes, a shelter, books, things that whatever drives you and motivates you that you want, but is not anything higher than physical, right? Those base instincts, that's the Nephesh. So control them. Use what you need to use, what's healthy for your ultimate spiritual goals, but don't be controlled by them. Discipline your emotions and the reason. This is now the Ruach, so educate yourself. The Ruach is the spheres from Yesod up to Chesed. And those are all of your deepest emotions, thoughts, anything in your mental world, right? Anything controlled by that sword, that symbolic sword in occultism. So discipline them by whatever means you need to. And this is like, I can't give examples. It's a very personal thing. You need to know what's good in your mental realm, what's good in your emotional realm, and what needs work. That's something that you need to identify as an individual. And then nourish the higher aspirations. So that's your intuitive nature, the chaya, the life, and the yechaida, the self of self, the self, right? So find out what your innermost spiritual core looks like and seek that. Do good unto others for its own sake, not for reward, not for gratitude from them, not for sympathy. If thou art generous, thou wilt not long for thine ears to be tickled by expressions of gratitude. Plain and simple, straightforward. Just do good for the sake of doing good. If we all did that, it would be a lot less to complain about. Remember that unbalanced force is evil, that unbalanced severity is but cruelty and oppression, but that also unbalanced mercy is but weakness which would allow and abet evil. Act passionately, think rationally, be thyself. This is the line I was talking about at the beginning. It's about the balance of the pillar of severity and the pillar of mercy. Being cruel and harsh and passing judgment every single second of the day is not healthy. That being said, being too lenient, being too forgiving, just letting people walk all over you, that's not healthy either, and that's neither one is doing good. So you have to take things case by case and really think about before you take a big action, because you could do a lot of good or a lot of hurt without thinking correctly. Act passionately, think rationally, be thyself. And the self, there's the lower self, the Nephesh, and the higher self, the Ruach, and the highest self, the Yechida. But be thyself is being not just who I am, Lexi, right? It's, no, what is my highest self? Be that. True ritual is as much action as word. It is will. I would like to say that's straightforward, but I could say a couple words on it. That I look at life is a ritual. Everything that we do creates karmic bonds. Ritual is action and word. And when we're doing gestures, we're speaking divine names, we're invoking forces, it is will, right? It's the intent that goes into it. And I think that that's a great way of saying, people could do a ritual, but they're not really controlling the forces or the energies, or they haven't trained that vital sixth sense, right? With the psychic center of one's being. And they're not able to really control the astral and to be able to put an intention into it and send it off to go accomplish what it needs to accomplish. So I hope that that's enough on that point, but true ritual is that it is putting intent into something and creating. Remember that this earth is but an atom in the universe, and that thou thyself art but an atom thereon, and that even couldst thou become the god of this earth, whereon thou crawlest and grovellest, that thou wouldst even then be but an atom and one amongst many. Nevertheless, have the greatest self-respect, and to that end sin not against thyself. The sin which is unpardonable is to knowingly and willfully reject truth, to fear knowledge, lest that knowledge ponder not to thy prejudices. Also, the word of sin is restriction. So if you're restricting yourself based on what you need, and I could use myself as an example because I have my own experience at my armamentarium. Being transgender, I was raised to be homophobic and transphobic, and by my peers and my family to dislike people like me. So it was very ingrained that I can't even be myself without experiencing wrath and hatred. So I was taught from a very, very early infant age to be afraid of being myself, right? That being said, to knowingly so that would have been the sin of restriction, to restrict being who you are and doing your will, manifesting your most authentic self and allowing that to be the change that you bring to the world, first and foremost. Then once you actualize yourself, then you could start interacting with the world by not bringing on more karmic baggage than you might otherwise incur just by chance and going through life. That said, we are small. I wanted to talk about this before, and I waited. We are tiny. Our planet, in the grand scheme of the universe, is tiny. If there is more universes somewhere, Jesus, I mean, look how big the sky is behind me, and it's like, our world is this big in a universe that's this big. If there's multiple infinite universes, and it's like, we're just a tiny speck of dust on a speck of dust in a speck of dust. And it's like, I think that should be humbling. And people have these egos, myself included at times, where I am the great I am, right? And even if you are the grand dictator and you've conquered the physical earth and you're now the leader of the planet, well, you're still a speck of dust on a speck of dust in a speck of dust. And it's like, I think it's really humbling to consider that, but nevertheless have the greatest self-respect. And to that end, sin not against thyself. So love yourself, right? Be your most authentic self. Take pride in who you are, but don't let it be pride to the point that you are hurting yourself and others, right? I think that there's an interesting balancing act that comes there. You know, we might be just a speck of dust on a speck of dust, but still love yourself, because this is what you have. You have your body on this planet to experience what you need to experience. So enjoy it, because this body's temporary and you'll never be this person again at this point in time. To obtain magical power, learn to control thought. Admit only those ideas that are in harmony with the end desired, and not every stray and contradictory idea that presents itself. So this is interesting. To gain magical power, learn to control thought. This is implying on the tree of life the Ruach, right? That I talked about, Yesod, the ninth sphere up to the fourth sphere, Chesed. Mastery of the emotions, mastery of the intellect. By doing certain rituals and climbing the tree of life, you start to endow yourself with certain aptitudes, abilities. There are specific trainings that occur or are recommended for each sphere of life. Once you've started to incorporate those practices and you're starting to gain some mastery over those practices, for instance, if you're doing your asanas and pranayama, you're starting to work with prana, right? This life force, this energy that's within you is starting to come out and be released. That's one example. So every practice has some type of thing that comes with it. But in order to really master asana, pranayama, and dharana, right, focus of thought, it requires a severe discipline. There are days where you're not going to want to do those practices, but you have to figure out, well, how can I make myself do this? How can I, in my busy life, put aside that half hour, an hour a day to do these practices that I need to be doing? And in time, if you continue to do them, you start to gain more and more access to higher realms and spiritual abilities and the ability to invoke God forms and commune with spirits and banish your negative aspects of lower self or put them into their proper places, right? And the more you start to discipline your mind, the easier it is to see when a thought pops into my head, I don't have to act on it. You start to gain a self-mastery in that capacity. For instance, a person with like drug addiction, right? Just because a person is hooked mentally on a drug like cocaine, where it's not so physically dependent, you could stop it without severe physical pain for days, right? There's a calling that comes when you do cocaine. But if you get to a point where you have control over yourself, you don't have to act on every thought that comes into mind. So like a person that does coke and then is craving more, if they really have some type of self-discipline and mastery, just because their mind is telling them I want more, no, they know like, okay, the craving is going to go away in about 15-20 minutes. I just have to hang tight and not engage with that thought, and I could do something else with myself. You know, I think for everybody, you have to figure out how not to act on your lesser thoughts. If you're like an overeater, for instance, and you're trying to get healthier, well, by doing certain practices, you do gain mastery over your thinking realm, right? Your mental realm. And you'd start to be able to come to terms with, okay, is this a healthy thought in action, or is this a very self-destructive thought in action? And do I need to act on it or not? Just because my body's telling me it wants something, does it actually need that? And start to have certain standards that you could apply. That being said, don't let every stray contradictory idea that presents itself, don't act on it. Know thyself. What is your ultimate goal spiritually? Do you know your will? Do you know why you've incarnated? Do you know your nature? If you do, put all of your energy towards it. And if you do, I'm sure I don't need to be telling you that, but for people that are just starting, figure out who you are as a person and work up from there. Fixed thought is a means to an end. Therefore, pay attention to the power of silent thought and meditation. The material act is but the outward expression of thy thought. And therefore hath it been said that the thought of foolishness is sin. Thought is the commencement of action, and if chance thought can produce much effect, what cannot fixed thought do? Think about how many people are not disciplined. And still, a lot of people go on to live happy, successful lives without ever really disciplining their body or mind, or having any type of insight into spiritual internal realms or external spiritual realms either. And still they could sometimes by chance find happy, successful lives, and by chance stumble onto things that they really should be doing and doing their will, right? What then is a person who's disciplining themselves on a daily basis able to do? It's a much different process. The more you know yourself, the more you're able to go seek exactly what you need to be seeking. So it's as straightforward as that to my mind. So when a thought pops into your head, I would say, take a look at what thoughts are coming, and every time a thought comes, think about it. Where is this coming from? Is it from past experience? Did I hear a TV show or something that put that thought into the air that I picked up on and I'm remembering? Why am I thinking the way I'm thinking? And if you start to pay attention, hey, what's coming into my mind? Is that something that's in line with who I am and my standards and my ethics and my morals and what I need in life? Or is that just something that's coming from societal indoctrination and pre-programming as a child, right? Is it good for me, or is it something that I should let go of? And start to act on what you need to be acting on when it comes to mind. Therefore, as hath already been said, establish thyself firmly in the equilibrium of forces, in the center of the cross of the elements, that cross from whose center is the creative word issued in the drawing of the dawning universe. This is a big concept. I have an idea that the word of the logos needs the Tifereth. It needs the seed of the Ruach in order to fully manifest in an individual. For instance, in the wheel of the zodiac, which is Chakma, I believe that the sun is the center of that zodiac, Kabbalistically and magically. So if you're centering your being in Tifereth with the Holy Guardian Angel in the center of that hexagram, you are then able to act more properly upon the word of the Logos, be that the limo or any other past word. Or if you get to the point magically and you have your own word and your magical formula and you're able to apply it, I think balancing yourself right in Tifereth, where all of the forces converge, you have access to not only a great array of different elemental and planetary energies, but also direct contact with that logos, with the sun being in the center of the wheel of the zodiac spinning around it. So I personally like this statement for that reason, and I think practically you have to figure out what that means for you, but hopefully my description gives you what I do for myself with that verse and how I reflect on it. Be thou therefore prompt and active as the sylphs, but avoid frivolity and caprice. Be energetic and strong like the salamanders, but avoid irritability and ferocity. Be flexible and attentive to images like the undine, but avoid idleness and changeability. Be laborious and patient like the gnomes, but avoid grossness and avarice. I think that this statement on its surface is showing that there's a duality in everything. Even spirits and elementals, they have a nature to them, just like we have a nature. And there are, in all things, a positive aspect and a negative aspect, a healthy aspect and a destructive aspect. And so this just, on the surface, also gives nature of these entities based on the elements. The sylphs are one that come to mind because of Crowley's receiving the Book of the Law. He wanted to show Rose Kelly the sylphs, and he wanted to do that by using the Bornless One in the Great Pyramid of Giza, I believe. And it's interesting that he received the Book of the Law, which was his law to be as a magus later on. He would come to identify Thelema as his word. And so it's interesting that he used the Bornless One to try to invoke sylphs, which are airy elementals, and that the previous line was about establishing yourself in the center of the cross, being Sephiroth, right? In order to achieve the creative word issued in the birth of the dawning of the universe, the Logos. So I just find it interesting that he invoked this airy force and received his word as a magus. Just a interesting note. But then past that, it just gives the salamanders, and these are things, to reflect on, I think it's everything I've already said. Don't just act on any thought that comes to mind. You have the ability to choose what you do every single moment, day by day, second to second, minute to minute. And don't act on the lesser forces unless you know it's in line with your will, in which case, best of luck to you. And, 20, so shalt thou gradually develop the powers of thy soul. Paraphrased by acting on the higher aspirations rather than the lower. So shalt thou gradually develop the powers of the soul, and fit thyself to command the spirits of the elements. For wert thou to summon the gnomes to ponder to thine avarice, thou wouldst no longer command them, but they would command thee. Pause for a second, and that comes back to that line before, that the weak ones would have power over you. If you're abusing a spirit that you are more powerful than and you are in control of to act on your vices, you are hurting them and you are hurting themselves. Not only that, it goes on to say in a second that if you're summoning a spirit of a certain class or a certain species, right, for your own negative or lower nephesh intentions, you're not going to summon a powerful one, you're going to summon a weak one, and that weak one will have power over you. Wouldst thou abuse the pure beings of the woods and mountains to fill thy coffers and satisfy thy hunger of gold? Wouldst thou debase the spirits of living fire to serve thy wrath and hatred? Wouldst thou violate the purity of the souls of the waters to ponder to thy lust of debauchery? Wouldst thou force the spirits of the evening breeze to minister to thy folly and caprice? Know that with such desires, thou canst but attract the weak ones, not the strong, and in that case, the weak will have power over thee. So just really quick, you are responsible for your actions, and for lower spirits and things less than you, you are also responsible. So if you are hurting another spirit by forcing it to do something that is going to bring it negative karma, you're doubly responsible right there. So just keep that in mind. In the true religion there is no sect. Therefore take heed that thou blaspheme not the name by which another knoweth his God. For if thou do this thing in Jupiter, thou wilt blaspheme Yod He Vav He and in Osiris Yahashua. Ask and ye shall have, seek and ye shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. This comes back to, Liber 61, Belcause. If you read that text, it talks about a very similar thing, that Crowley was trying to establish the AA by scraping back the cultural aspects of religions, pulling out the occult and esoteric values and teachings, and putting them into one order in a way that made sense for a person to attain unity, to attain the highest. So that being said, if you look at every religion, there is a lot of commonalities in things. I don't want to start going into comparative religion here, so I don't want to hold hostage the video, but all religions have the same symbols, or maybe they're labeled differently, but they have the same meanings and they point to the same direction. They are all pointing inward, right to that heart area and right above, right? That's the aim of Thelema. That is the aim of Crowley's view with this text and occultism from the Golden Dawn, Hermetic occultism. I'm not going to say whether you should blasphemy or not another's God. The text says not to, and for the reasons that if you look at the magician's tables, for instance, Jupiter will have certain gods, Mercury will have certain deities, Venus will have certain deities, all attributed to it. So if you're insulting one person's, right, if you're insulting Shiva, and Shiva is in the sphere of the zodiac, you're also insulting Mercury on a comparative religion aspect, because these entities have the same attributes, and just because they were labeled something or have a different image, they are still the same principles of the universe. So I guess you could keep that in mind. In that sense, religion in general, there are certain religions that have become so perverse and denigrated over the centuries and millennia that they no longer resemble what they were supposed to. And in that sense, like, I don't like the Vatican. I don't have a problem with Jesus, but I have a problem with the way people have taken and twisted and picked and choose what out of the Bible is acceptable and what is not in order to ponder to their prejudices. And in the last one, the very last sentence, ask and you shall have, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. I think that that's just, as a magician, when you put something out there verbally, you're putting that into the universe to manifest itself. When you ask, you will have it. You could put all of your magical intentions towards your vices, and you'll get that if you really put your energy into it, and if it's meant to be, right, ultimately. But if you start to put your intentions towards higher aspirations, you could have that too. So it really depends on what you do with your time. Just a thing to consider. Knock and it shall be opened unto you. So if you're seeking, there are, a whole bunch of schools of thought out there, and if you're really having the call to find some type of teaching or a community in a spiritual way, they're out there. There's a lot of different communities, sects, and traditions, and best of luck to you. It's out there. You just got to look a little bit and do your research. Don't just join before you do your research, I would say. Find out who you're linking yourself to, and if you agree with their views, and if you do, join with them. So with that, that's my video. I hope that somebody got something out of it. Love is the law. Love under will.